Hey guys, tonight we step softly onto the sun-baked streets of Uruk, sometime around 3000 BCE. The sky is beginning to deepen into amber, casting long shadows from the ziggurats and adobe walls. Somewhere nearby, a vendor is packing up a basket of onions, and two scribes argue about whose reed stylus is better. You're here at the perfect time. When the workday winds down, sandals shuffle toward taverns, and the scent of fresh-baked barley cakes wafts lazily through the evening air. It's not just dinner time, it's the ancient equivalent of happy hour. You might be tempted to romanticize it. After all, isn't this the cradle of civilization? But you probably wouldn't survive your first round of Sumerian brews. For one thing, there's no foam, no glass mugs, just a big clay pot of sour liquid and a very long straw. And trust me, no one's checking the alcohol content. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and what time it is for you. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive barefoot, not because you forgot your shoes, but because everyone is barefoot, or nearly so. The ground is warm, cracked, and dust sticks to your feet as you walk toward the heart of Uruk. A few goats wander past. A boy chases them half-heartedly. The city smells of earth, river water, and yeast. Always yeast. Uruk isn't just any city, it's the city, the first of its kind, some say. 1,000 clay houses sprawl outward from the towering temple complex at the center, and if you climb high enough, the view is nothing but a flat brown patchwork stitched with canals. Boats drift lazily through them. Somewhere in the temple district, a priest is ringing a bell, but no one is rushing. This hour belongs to the people. You pass a weaver's workshop, the loom's now quiet. Women sit out front, their hair tied in coils, sharing flatbread and dried dates. One is still humming a lullaby as she rocks her child. Further along, two farmers offload sacks of something fragrant, onions maybe, or leeks, laughing about something you can't quite catch. There's an ease to the way people move now, as if the entire city exhales in unison when the sun dips just low enough. And then, of course, there are the taverns. They're not marked with flashy signs or swinging doors. Most are tucked between homes or built into courtyard corners. You can tell them by the smell, a mix of fermented grains, baked earth, and sweat, and by the clusters of men and women crouched low on mats, sipping from shared pots with reeds taller than your arm. Some of them are already giggling. One woman slaps a man's shoulder and nearly spills the beer. He retaliates by poking her in the ribs. This is what passes for flirting, apparently. Inside, the tavern is dim and cool. Clay walls plastered with faded murals. The floor is packed earth, slightly damp to keep it from cracking. A few tiny oil lamps hang near the ceiling, flickering softly. The light they cast is more suggestion than illumination, but your eyes adjust quickly. The tavern keeper, a woman in a teal headscarf, nods at you but doesn't speak. She's busy measuring out rations, beer for some, grain cakes for others. Her ledger, etched into a clay tablet, rests on the counter beside a pile of reed pens. Each customer drops a token into a jar before taking a seat. The system is simple. No token, no drink. This practice, paying with clay tokens, might seem primitive, but it's basically the world's first tab. Historians still argue whether it was originally invented for taverns or temples. Either way, it works. You sit beside a group of labourers still dusted in brick powder. Their hands are cracked, their sandals worn through, but they seem content. One gestures at the communal pot between them, and you take a sip through your reed. It's earthy, like drinking rainwater from an old bread bowl. There's a slight tang, a hint of something yeasty and sour, but not unpleasant. More soup than beer, really. You swallow slowly, then glance around. No one's watching. They're too busy telling stories, slapping knees, and whistling at someone who just walked in. Every so often, someone stands to dance. There's no music, just clapping, and the occasional reed flute. But it's enough. The dancer, a woman in a russet tunic, sways rhythmically as others cheer. One child joins her, then two. The floor kicks up dust as they spin. Outside, the sun finally disappears and the air cools. Lanterns flicker to life along the street, their glow golden and soft. Somewhere distant, a boatman sings to the rhythm of his oars. You begin to feel it, that gentle fuzziness in your chest, the calm that comes after a long day, the sense that you've stepped into something ancient and oddly familiar. The Sumerians didn't just invent writing and the wheel, they also invented this, the gentle social buzz at the end of a workday. Happy hour, 3000 BCE edition. And honestly, they might have done it better. A fly buzzes lazily near your cup. You wave it away and lean back against the wall. The clay is cool on your spine. Around you, the conversation hums like a hive. 1,000 stories unfolding quietly, one pot of beer at a time. You feel the city settle into night. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then is quiet. The stars begin to emerge, one by one, reflected dimly in the canal's still water. A breeze stirs the fabric above the tavern's entrance. The scent of brewing barley lingers, sweet and sour, and strangely comforting. You're in the birthplace of civilization, but for tonight, it just feels like home. You wake the next morning, not in your bed, but under the soft rustling shade of a woven reed canopy near the tavern's entrance. The air smells faintly of damp clay and last night's beer pots, and your neck is stiff from sleeping half upright against a sun-warmed wall. No one seems to mind. Around you, the tavern is slowly stirring to life. Someone sweeps dust out the doorway with a bunch of dried reeds, while a yawning scribe balances a clay tablet on one knee, sketching something half-formed. This is just the start of another Sumerian day, and unlike the late afternoon buzz, mornings are slow, practical, and driven by lists. Lots and lots of lists. You stretch, shake the dust from your tunic, and wander toward the heart of Uruk again, where the real action is happening. The markets, the temples, and, if you know who to ask, the breweries. Because where there's beer, there's brewing. And where there's brewing, there's bureaucracy. The Sumerians didn't mess around with their beer making. It was a serious operation. Breweries weren't cozy back rooms with small pots and a bit of guesswork. No, these were full-fledged production centres, sometimes run by priestesses, sometimes by entrepreneurial families, but always with a sharp eye on the numbers. You peek into a courtyard where a group of women in ochre robes stir enormous vats with paddles as long as their arms. The vats steam faintly. A mixture of mashed dates, water, and crushed barley bubbles away. One woman hums as she works, sweat gleaming on her brow. Another is grinding grain with a flat stone, rhythmic and relentless, while a third shapes loaves of bread, not for eating, but for brewing. See, Sumerian beer starts with bread, thick, doughy loaves called bapir, baked until hard, then crumbled and soaked. Add some water, a handful of dates, maybe a dash of wild yeast from the open air, and let nature do the rest. You've just made beer, or at least beer like gruel. The result is unfiltered, cloudy, and full of chunky surprises. It's not elegant, but it's efficient and nutrition-packed. This wasn't something you sipped at royal banquets. It was your daily calorie fix. Historians still argue whether beer was more important than bread in the average Sumerian's diet. Some say the line between food and drink was so blurred it didn't matter. And speaking of blurred lines, try asking where brewing ends and temple work begins. The answer? You'll get 5 different opinions, none of them short. In Sumer, religion and beer were entangled like river reeds. Temples often housed breweries. Why? Because the gods had to be fed and watered. And what better way to please a deity than with a daily offering of fresh beer and a loaf of bread? The goddess Ninkasi even got her own hymn, which doubles as a brewing recipe. Imagine your favourite stout having a theme song sung by temple acolytes at sunrise. You hear a low chant drifting from one of those temples now, soft voices rising over the bubbling of the brew vats. A girl no older than 12 carries a jug the size of her head up the stairs toward the altar. She doesn't spill a drop. Brewing here isn't just practical, it's sacred. Each step, from kneading the dough to sealing the jars, carries symbolic weight. The fermenting beer? It's not just going sour. It's being transformed, blessed, made divine through bubbling and time. You're not just drinking calories. You're communing with ancient spirits. Of course, not everyone's in it for the spirituality. Some folks are just here for the logistics. Behind the brewery, in a shaded alcove lined with basket shelves, an older man sits cross-legged, surrounded by clay tablets. He's counting tokens, pressing them into wet clay, muttering about barley quotas. His assistant, a scrawny teenager with a chipped front tooth, runs back and forth between vats and shelves, double-checking rations. You overhear bits and pieces. 2 loaves to the temple, 1 jug reserved for the governor's court, 4 tokens missing from the merchant's batch. No one raises their voice. It's all very calm, very dusty, and slightly chaotic. The tokens are shaped like animals, tools, cones, and wedges, each with a meaning. They'll be sealed into little envelopes. Yes, literal clay envelopes, which must be broken open later to verify transactions. It's like smashing open a piggy bank to check your receipts. And this, oddly enough, is where writing begins, because the Sumerians didn't invent writing to record epic poetry or dynastic boasts. They did it to track beer and goats and onions. Historians still argue whether writing first emerged in breweries or granaries. But either way, it was driven by a need to remember who owed what to whom. That wedge-shaped script, cuneiform, started as pictures of beer jugs and grain stalks. Over time, It evolved into stylized marks pressed into clay with a sharpened reed, entire accounting systems, elaborate temple inventories, and brewing logs filled shelves. Even now, archaeologists are still decoding old brewery tablets, piecing together daily operations from 5,000 years ago. You can almost imagine one of those scribes now, crouched low over a clay slab, tongue sticking out slightly as he carefully presses each symbol. He's trying to write Bad Batch in a way that won't offend the priestess. Back outside, a vendor hawks hot barley cakes smeared with a dollop of mashed date paste. You try one. It's warm, chewy, and faintly sweet, like a cross between bread and oatmeal. The kind of food that pairs nicely with, well, a jar of cloudy Sumerian beer. The breeze shifts, carrying with it the scent of yeasty mash and roasted grain. You watch a young boy roll an empty beer pot down the street like a toy wheel, laughing as it wobbles toward a donkey cart. Somewhere, a woman calls out his name, and he scurries away, still giggling. This city breathes beer, not in loud tavern roars or frothy excess, but in quiet daily acts, stirring the mash, pressing the seal, chanting to Ninkasi before sunrise. And you're soaking in it, like barley bread in sweet water. The day stretches on, sun rising higher until the entire city glows like a kiln, hot, dry, and humming with motion. You've retreated into one of Uruk's covered arcades, narrow and shaded, where cool air snakes between mud brick columns and voices echo off the walls like murmurs in a temple. Even the goats seem to be napping. But the scribes are hard at work. If the brewers are the pulse of Uruk, the scribes are its memory. And today, you've stumbled upon a particularly fussy group of them, squatting in a half circle on the floor of a scriptorium. No desks here, just low reed stools, lots of dusty feet, and the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of styluses pressing into clay. Their tablets aren't dramatic epics or love poems. No, today it's all about taxes and taverns. You lean over one shoulder and squint at a wedge-covered slab. It's a list, dozens of names, well, name symbols, matched with quantities of beer distributed, grain paid, and notes in the margin about excess foaming or unusually sour. One entry even includes a little sketch of a disgruntled-looking face beside a jug. Some things never change. Beer wasn't just for parties or temple rituals. It was wages. If you were a labourer digging a canal or stacking mud bricks for the city wall, you didn't expect a purse of silver. You got paid in beer, often measured out daily, from temple storehouses. Historians still argue whether this was fair compensation or a clever way to keep workers buzzed and compliant. And this is where the taverns come in, not just as gathering places, but as nodes in a broader economic web. Many weren't privately owned at all, but extensions of the temple economy. The beer they served was part of a redistribution system. The temples brewed, measured, taxed, and handed out rations. The taverns ensured the beer got consumed before it spoiled, and possibly recorded who said what after their third pot. Tavern keepers, often women, were both publicans and administrators. They tracked portions, honoured temple quotas, and, if they were especially savvy, adjusted grain ratios depending on seasonal harvests. There's even a tablet from the city of Lagash, listing a tavern keeper being fined for diluting beer with water. Yes, the world's first unhappy Yelp review, preserved forever in clay. You walk past another ledger in progress and catch a curious phrase. 4 pots of thick beer, 2 for the priest, 1 for the canal foreman, 1 for the goddess. Wait, the goddess? Yes, Ninkasi again. Or sometimes Inanna, depending on the temple. Beer was a holy offering, and like any divine tribute, it had to be accounted for with absolute seriousness. Don't imagine some poor priestess pouring out beer onto the ground. No, most offerings were symbolic. That 4th pot likely got recycled into temple feasts, or rationed out to workers as a blessed batch. But the accounting? That stayed. Clay tablets piled high in temple archives, carefully labelled, sometimes sealed. And while you might think this system was too complex for its own good, keep in mind, it lasted for over 1,000 years. That's more stability than most modern governments. Just outside, the street is slowly heating to its full midday intensity. A merchant walks past, balancing 3 baskets on her head, 2 filled with lentils, the 3rd with cracked emmer grain. She pauses at a stall where a bored teenager tends a pot of simmering soup. You smell garlic, cumin, and the thick aroma of cooking beer. Not a drink this time, more like a barley stew. You wander closer. The stall's sign is scratched into a piece of fired clay and hung from a nail. 2 jugs with steam lines. The universal symbol for, yes, this is food and drink, and it's hot. You sit. The storekeeper ladles out a bowl of the thick stew and slides it toward you. It steams in the midday haze, and you blow on it gently before tasting. The flavour is nutty, a little tangy, definitely beer-based, but with chickpeas and something like parsley stirred in. Filling, comforting, the kind of dish you could eat every day and still find satisfying. As you eat, a conversation drifts over from the next table. 2 men, one wearing a priest's bead necklace, the other with the thick wrists of a dock worker, are arguing about the future of their temple's beer quota. One insists the barley stores are being undercounted. The other mutters about the goddess being shorted her share. You pretend not to listen, but it's clear. Beer isn't just a beverage. It's politics. It's accounting. It's religion. And it's gossip. A breeze kicks up, swirling dust along the alley. Someone sneezes. A baby wails in the distance. The sun slides behind a passing cloud, and for a moment, the heat lifts. Back in the scriptorium, the scribes are packing up their tools. Clay tablets are stacked neatly in baskets, each tagged with a string and a wax seal. One apprentice almost drops his pile, catches it at the last second, and gets a sharp look from the elder next to him. You recognize that expression. It's the same look modern office workers give when someone almost spills coffee on the quarterly reports. And that's what these are. Not just artifacts, not dusty museum pieces. They're reports, invoices, spreadsheets, alive with urgency and bureaucracy. You can almost hear the muttered complaints about quotas, temple audits, and late deliveries. Somewhere in the city, another pot of beer is just beginning to bubble. Another tablet is waiting for its first wedge. Another tavern keeper sighs, wiping sweat from her brow as she counts the tokens for the evening's rush. Everything here turns on beer. Not just thirst, but systems, people, power. And the more you watch, the more you realize this isn't just ancient history, It's your Tuesday afternoon office meeting, your grocery store receipt, your neighbourhood bar trivia night, just dustier. You drain the last of your barley stew, nod a quiet thanks, and step back into the bright, beer-soaked heartbeat of the world's first city. You're beginning to notice a rhythm to things in Uruk. The slow bustle of the market, the clink of clay jugs, the rising and falling murmur of street chatter. It's like living inside a gentle percussion ensemble made entirely of mud, grain, and gossip. But if there's a place where the city's pulse becomes a full-blown lullaby, it's the tavern. As the sun begins to lower, casting golden streaks across the clay rooftops, you wander toward a more residential stretch of the city. The air here is scented with bread, fig paste, and something sharp and earthy, fermenting mash, bubbling away in deep jars. You follow your nose around a corner and find her, the tavern keeper. She's older than you expect. Her hair is wrapped in layers of blue-dyed linen, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her hands are strong, worn by years of lifting pots and scribbling measurements. She's crouched over a large vat, stirring slowly with a paddle as wide as your arm. The beer isn't ready yet. It's still in the gruel phase, a thick, porridge-like sludge of half-sprouted grain, but the smell is unmistakable, yeasty, slightly sour, homey. You sit on a low bench nearby. She glances at you but says nothing. A black cat circles her legs and settles in the shade. You'd ask questions, but you've learned by now. Just be quiet and observe. This isn't a tavern in the modern sense. There's no bar, no stools, no dartboard with half-missing numbers. It's a courtyard with woven mats, clay cups stacked in a corner, and a painted mural of Ninkazi pouring golden beer into a goblet the size of your head. One by one, the regulars drift in. A basket weaver with splinters in his thumbs. A young woman with red clay smudges on her knees, probably from lining a new kiln. An older man with a ceremonial braid, possibly a minor temple clerk, judging by the ink stains on his tunic. They sit cross-legged and wait, not impatiently. The tavern keeper finishes her stirring, sets down the paddle, and begins the ancient process of ladling. The beer, when it finally arrives, isn't clear or frothy. It's opaque, murky, more like a grain smoothie than a lager. But it's served cold, in cups rimmed with dried mint, and it's surprisingly refreshing. You take a sip, then another. It's tangy, nutty, and faintly sweet, like liquid bread, with a tiny bite at the end that makes your cheeks warm. You glance around, and for a moment, it feels like every part of your body exhales. This is the Sumerian version of happy hour. There's no menu, no waiter, just slow conversation, slow sipping, and the shared understanding that nothing else needs doing right now. A boy begins playing a stringed instrument in the corner. It's crude, with only a few notes, but he plucks a hypnotic rhythm. Someone else hums. A pair of old women clap gently in time, barely audible over the murmur of talk. Then comes the entertainment, not from a professional bard or priest, but from one of the regulars. The basket weaver stands and begins a tale. You don't catch every word. Your Sumerian's a little patchy, but it's about a fox who tricked a farmer out of his grain. There's a punchline about goats and garlic, and the entire courtyard erupts into sleepy, genuine laughter. Historians still argue whether these taverns functioned as true communal spaces or more exclusive clubs. Some believe certain temples restricted who could attend. Others suggest they were the closest thing ancient Mesopotamia had to democratic ground. Anyone with a clay token and a thirst could come. What's certain is this: the tavern was more than a place to drink. It was a pressure valve for a tightly wound society. You sip again. The beer is beginning to blur the edges of your thoughts in the most pleasant way. A woman across from you picks up a piece of reed paper and begins sketching something. A stylized bird, maybe a goose. You smile at her, and she shrugs, as if to say, "It just came to me." The tavern keeper walks past, refilling cups with practiced grace. You notice the tall jar she's using has a mark on the side, a tiny line etched near the neck. Measurement, regulation. Even here, in this relaxing space, the temple's eye is still present. Beer may be sacred, but it's also rationed. A low conversation breaks out about a recent eclipse. Was it a sign? Should the beer be blessed again? Someone jokes that the goddess Ninkasi probably just blinked too hard. Another laughs and mutters, or maybe she had too much of her own brew. Even in reverence, there's room for jokes. That's something deeply human, isn't it? You lean back against the sun-warmed wall and close your eyes for a moment. The rhythm of the music, the low conversation, the buzz of distant flies, it all wraps around you like a soft blanket. And you realize something. In this world without clocks, where everything from wages to worship revolves around beer, time flows differently. The days are marked not by hours, but by meals, by rituals, by the subtle change in taste as the brew matures. This tavern, mud brick walls, mint-laced beer, gossip, and grainy stew, isn't just a place. It's an era distilled, a small bubbling heart of the oldest civilization we know. You take another sip, and the last light of the sun slips away behind the rooftop line. Night settles slowly in Uruk. It doesn't fall so much as melt across the rooftops, softening edges, turning the mud brick homes into smudges of dusky amber. Stars begin to emerge, scattered like forgotten barley across an obsidian field. In the tavern courtyard, someone lights a shallow clay lamp, its flicker casting gentle shadows that stretch like fingers over the faces of the last drinkers. You're still there, lingering. Not drunk, not exactly. This beer doesn't work like the modern kind. It's more of a slow warmth, like floating in a slightly too hot bath. The conversation has thinned to murmurs, and people are starting to drift home, one by one. But the tavern keeper is still there, her sleeves now rolled back down, her hands busy preparing the next batch of mash for morning. As you quietly offer to help, because why not, she hands you a jar of cracked emmer grain. The brew starts here, with grain soaked just enough to germinate, and then crushed to unlock the sugars. You take a wooden scoop and begin pouring it into a shallow clay basin, one of several lined up like a little beer nursery. This is where you learn the quiet magic of ancient brewing, not the drinking, but the making. The process is surprisingly complex, even by today's standards. Sumerians didn't write down recipes in cookbooks, but they left enough clues in hymns and administrative tablets to piece it together. Beer wasn't boiled. There was no consistent access to metal pots that large, so it relied entirely on careful timing and ambient fermentation. The grain is mixed with water and heated just enough to coax out sweetness, but not kill the wild yeasts floating in the air. No thermometers, no timers, just sight, smell, and intuition. You stir the mixture with a wide paddle, feeling the thick texture glide and tug beneath your grip. The tavern keeper nods approvingly. A faint scent rises, something between sourdough and warm cereal, earthy, humble, familiar. And here's the surprising bit. This wasn't just women's work, or men's work. Brewing in Sumer was something in between. While women often managed the taverns and home-based production, there were temple breweries too, run by men under the authority of priesthood. Beer blurred social lines in a way few things did. It was domestic and divine, everyday and sacred. Somewhere in the middle of stirring, you start to hum a little, just under your breath. One of the melodies from earlier, the string player's repeating tune. The rhythm matches your movement. Stir, pause, hum, scoop. The cat is still nearby, now curled tightly into a ball. Crickets, tiny, ancient ones, chirp somewhere beyond the wall. The firelight flickers again. This moment feels like it could stretch on forever. Historians still debate how much of this beer was actually alcoholic. Some believe it was only mildly fermented, with a short shelf life and low potency. Others argue for multiple varieties. Some brewed longer, some spiced, some honeyed. There's even evidence of beer being filtered through straws with metal tips, possibly to avoid floating grain husks or even bugs. You're handed one such straw now. It's surprisingly long, made of reed with a tiny strainer carved into the end. You try sipping a leftover cup. It works. The beer is smoother this way. The bits filtered out, the flavour purer. No hops, of course. They won't be discovered for millennia. But there's a wild floral edge from herbs you can't name. It's not gourmet, but it's alive. And suddenly, you start to see beer not just as a beverage, but as infrastructure. Entire supply chains built around it. Fields tilled, water fetched, tablets marked, debts tracked. Beer was how workers were paid, how priests made offerings, how families celebrated new children or mourned their dead. One scholar called it the engine of civilization, and you get it now. Beer wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity, safer than river water, easier to store, dense with calories, and with just enough alcohol to keep spirits high and microbes at bay. You help lift one of the shallow vats onto a ledge for overnight fermentation. It's heavier than you expected, thick, sloshy, and warm. The tavern keeper grunts her thanks, wipes her brow with the hem of her sleeve, and then pours a tiny splash from a separate jar into the batch. Starter, like sourdough. She's kept it going for years, fed it from brew to brew like a pet or a prayer. There's something soothing about that kind of continuity. You imagine generations of women and the occasional enterprising temple scribe repeating this process, stirring under starlight, brewing at dawn, trading cups for bread or sheep, or maybe even just a song. It's one of those odd human things, both entirely practical and profoundly emotional. It reminds you of your own kitchen, your own weird rituals, how you always stir the soup clockwise, how the sound of a kettle makes you feel oddly safe. Turns out some things don't change, even after 5,000 years. The cat stretches and yawns, You realise the courtyard is empty now, save for the two of you. The lamp's flame is low. The last vat is tucked away. The tavern keeper finally speaks. Just one line in slow, almost musical Sumerian. You don't catch every word, but you think she's saying, "The beer remembers." And somehow, that makes sense. You nod, brush your hands on your tunic, and start toward the sleeping city. The stars are brighter now. The streets are quieter. The air is cooler. But the warmth from the beer lingers, not just in your chest, but in your thoughts, like you've been let in on a secret as old as language itself. You follow the narrow path away from the tavern, the soles of your sandals tapping gently on packed earth, still warm from the day's heat. Uruk sleeps lightly. Shadows of neighbours flicker behind reed mats. The occasional soft cough or snore wafting through open windows. The moon has climbed higher now, a curved silver grin above the rooftops, watching as you walk. Soon, you find yourself near the city's edge, where cultivated land begins to stretch outward like a fan. In the moonlight, the irrigation ditches gleam faintly, like veins feeding the fields. And here's where the real scale of Sumerian beer making becomes clear. Not in the cup, but in the grain. Emmer wheat and barley, the bedrock crops of the region, are everywhere. Neatly planted row after row, their stalks whispering in the breeze. Without this grain, there's no bread, no beer, no gods to praise, no taxes to collect, no reason to build a city. And it turns out, these fields weren't wild gambles. They were engineered. You crouch near a low stone channel, dipping your fingers into the cool water. It smells of mud and clay, but flows with purpose. These irrigation canals were among the first great feats of urban planning. Dug by hand, extended over years, some even regulated by law. Ancient tablets reveal debates over water rights, fines for broken levees, even complaints about upstream neighbours stealing more than their share. So yes, Sumer invented bureaucracy before breakfast. As you rise and walk along the canal, you notice a small structure nearby, a modest granary perhaps, or an outdoor threshing space. You approach quietly, only to find two young men half asleep beside baskets of grain. One is snoring with his mouth open. The other blinks groggily and gestures at a jar beside him. It's beer. Of course. They wave you over, and before long, you're perched on a pile of old sacks, sipping by starlight. These aren't elite scribes or priests. They're just labourers, probably from a work gang tied to the local temple. But even they have access to beer. In fact, they're paid in it. Daily rations, called cash in cuneiform, were measured in volume. A good day's work might earn a full jar. A rough day? Maybe just half. And there were tiers. Stronger beer for overseers. Weaker beer for ditch diggers. Historians still argue whether this system was fair, exploitative, or just plain practical. One of the workers offers you a bite of dried date paste. Sweet, sticky, and a welcome contrast to the beer's sour edge. You take a second bite before asking how long they've been out here. They shrug. Since the river rose. Which, judging by the moon phase and the water level, was 3 days ago. You lean back, belly full, arms stretched. Above you, constellations slowly wheel past. Some you know, others forgotten by time. The great twins, the plough, the scorpion. Sumerians were keen stargazers, their skies filled with gods and portents. Some scholars believe the beer calendar was loosely tied to the stars, marking festival days and brewing cycles. Others say that's reaching, but as you lie here, with buzzed workers, sleepy laughter, and distant frogs chirping along the canal, it feels plausible. And then you hear it, a low thump-thump, like someone striking a drum in the distance. The two workers sit up a bit straighter. Temple song, one mutters. Sure enough, from the direction of the ziggurat, the faint melody begins to carry. A slow, rhythmic chant accompanied by clapping woodblocks. It's part of an offering ritual, you're told. Tonight's beer batch must have been deemed worthy of the gods. They'll pour a portion into a ceremonial basin, then carry jars up the temple steps for the high priest to bless. You imagine it, rows of acolytes, robes swaying, each step carefully rehearsed. An entire religion held aloft on grain and fermentation. The gods, it seems, were thirsty. You sip the last of your beer and set the jar down. One of the workers, now clearly tipsy, tells a joke involving a goat, a broken pot, and a priest who couldn't hold his beer. You laugh politely. It makes little sense, but the delivery is solid. You're starting to feel drowsy again, the kind of full-body heaviness that comes after a long day and a long drink. You thank them, stand, and begin your walk back toward the heart of the city. The fields stretch behind you like a dream you're leaving too soon. The beer, the labourers, the canals, all woven into this ancient tapestry of ritual, sustenance, and survival. And as you return to the torchlit streets of Uruk, it strikes you that beer wasn't just a drink. It was a currency, a celebration, a prayer, a political tool, a breakfast. One might even say it was the glue that held everything together. Grain and water, yes, but also people, purpose, and place. You pass a reed seller rolling up his mat, a group of children chasing fireflies, a man with a lute humming a lullaby in a language that hasn't been spoken aloud in 4,000 years. You listen, you walk, you begin to understand. You turn a corner and find yourself in a quieter part of Uruk now, past the granaries and the canal-side huts, past the taverns and night watch fires. This district feels older, even by Sumerian standards. The buildings lean ever so slightly. The bricks faded into soft greys and golds by sun and time. You wander on, letting your footsteps echo softly down the cobbled path. Ahead, a structure looms with a low-slung silhouette, half house, half shrine. You wouldn't have noticed it during the day, but under moonlight, its carvings shine faintly. The clay walls are etched with figures, gods with bull horns, winged beasts, women with flared skirts pouring liquid from large jars. It's a brewery temple, one of several sacred spaces dedicated to the goddess Ninkasi. Yes, the Sumerians had a goddess specifically for beer. You push gently through the curtain of woven reeds at the entrance and step inside. It's quiet, lit by a single oil lamp flickering in the alcove. The air is cool and thick, with the scent of old barley, clay, and incense. You're not alone. An elderly priestess sits cross-legged near a pile of tablet fragments, humming softly as she polishes a vessel with practiced care. She doesn't look up as she speaks. You've come for Ninkasi's song, haven't you? You're not sure how to answer, but nod anyway. She gestures to a jar beside her. Drink first, then listen. You do as she says. The beer is thick and slightly spiced, different from the common stuff the workers had. It tastes ceremonial, if such a thing can be said of sour grain water. And then she begins to chant. It's soft, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You recognize some of the words. They match an actual Sumerian hymn known to scholars today. The hymn to Ninkasi, a poetic recipe meets praise song preserved on clay tablets. Ninkasi, you are the one who bakes the bapir in the big oven. You sit, cross-legged, mirroring her posture, lulled by the cadence. The song continues, describing the steps of brewing, from soaking the malt, to fermenting it in great vats, to lifting it with joy into the mouth of man. It's both practical guide and divine homage. You wonder how many other songs like this existed. How many were lost to time, sung only once under stars like these. Some scholars believe Ninkasi's hymn was passed down by oral tradition for centuries before someone thought to carve it into clay. Others suspect it was always written, used as a training tool for novice brewers in temple schools. Either way, it survived, barely. Just a few lines scratched in a wedge-shaped code on a crumbling tablet tucked in a museum basement. Yet here, in this moment, it's alive. The priestess stops singing and begins to speak instead, her voice even softer. In the beginning, beer was not just a drink. It was a bridge between worlds, between people, between the living and the gods. She tells you of rituals where beer was poured for the dead, of libations spilled on temple steps before battles, of weddings where guests toasted with honeyed ale until the sun rose again, of sickbeds where even the dying were offered a final sip. And you begin to understand that in ancient Sumer, beer was never just refreshment. It was meaning, distilled. The priestess stands slowly, joints creaking, and disappears into a back room. You remain seated, heart gently buzzing with barley and mystery. You look around the temple again. There are tiny niches with clay figurines, bull-headed men, women holding drinking straws, tiny cups balanced on their knees. The wall behind you bears a painted mural of a banquet scene. At the centre sits a goddess with foam rising from her cup like a crown. Her eyes meet yours, knowing, amused. And somewhere deep in your memory, you recall that archaeologists actually found drinking straws in elite tombs. Long decorated tubes made from gold and lapis lazuli. Apparently, the beer of the time was so unfiltered that people had to sip it through reeds or metal straws to avoid the gritty sediment. Some were even communal, with one jar and many straws shared among friends or feasting guests. Very hygienic, we're sure. The priestess returns and places something in your hand. It's a tiny clay token shaped like a jar. She presses your fingers around it and smiles. For the road, she says. You bow in thanks, place the token in your pouch, and rise to leave. As you step back into the night, the stars seem a little brighter, the air cooler. A soft breeze tugs at your tunic like a child begging for a story. The streets are emptier now, but your steps feel guided, like you're walking through a world still singing its oldest song just beneath the silence. You pass a quiet square where someone has left a full jar beside a statue of a seated man. You pause, curious, then remember. This is a common gesture in Sumer, leaving offerings to deceased ancestors. Even long after death, family members would return to tombs or home altars and leave bread, beer, and incense to nourish the spirits. Historians still debate whether this was symbolic or believed to be literal sustenance, but either way, the sentiment is clear. Beer wasn't just for the living. You offer a respectful nod and keep walking. The night deepens. You can hear the river now, lapping gently against the docks. Somewhere, a lone flute plays a wandering tune. You follow its echo, and through it all, through temples, toasts, songs, and shadows, one thought begins to settle in your bones, like cool sand. Sumer didn't just invent beer. They invented what beer means. You find yourself near the banks of the Euphrates now, where the soft slap of water against stone mingles with the distant creak of mooring ropes and the occasional sleepy grunt of a goat tied too close to a date palm. The stars overhead shimmer like slow drifting embers, and the city behind you seems to exhale, settling into the deeper stages of night. You follow a winding path beside the canal, passing silent warehouses and reed boats rocking gently in the current. A low wall to your right bears the faded imprint of a painted sign, some long-forgotten decree about grain storage or fishing hours. Bureaucracy, even here. Ahead, you spot a soft glow, lantern light filtering through the slats of a half-open door. You peek inside. It's a drinking den, not the bustling tavern you passed earlier, but a quieter, more relaxed sort. The walls are hung with faded tapestries, and the benches are smooth with years of use. Patrons lounge on cushions, talking in low murmurs or nodding off mid-sip. The smell here is warm and sweet, like fermented dates, barley cakes, and lamp oil. A man with salt and pepper hair waves you over, gesturing to the seat beside him. You look like you've been walking since the ziggurat was built. He chuckles. You grin and sit down. A clay cup is placed in your hand before you can even introduce yourself. The drink is richer than the temple beer, with a hint of fig or honey. Definitely one of the higher-end brews. You sip and sink into the cushion as conversation drifts around you. This, it turns out, is one of the famed evening houses where merchants and scribes gather not just to drink, but to exchange news, hatch schemes, and unwind. No shouting here, just the soft drone of stories and occasional laughter. The man beside you leans closer and says, "Want to know how it all started?" "The happy hour, I mean." You blink. "Sure." He grins. "It was the workers. Always the workers." He explains that back when cities like Uruk were just starting to boom, before proper walls or temples, labourers would finish their shifts hauling stone or digging irrigation ditches, then gather at makeshift huts by the water to share a communal jar of beer. One man would bring a pot, another would bring a loaf, and soon it became a ritual. Drink before dusk, swap gossip, and grumble about your overseer. Before long, the tradition was formalised. The city's administrators, ever eager to keep workers from rioting, arranged for government-issued beer rations at designated times. The sunset hour became a social pause built into the rhythm of the day. Weary bodies and dusty feet converged, shoulders relaxed, and, for a little while, everyone was equal, at least until the beer ran out. Historians still debate whether this proto-happy hour was a top-down initiative to control the populace, or an organic tradition that officials co-opted for convenience. Either way, the result was the same. Beer is punctuation, beer is reward, beer is the moment you put down your basket and picked up your cup. Your neighbour chuckles. We Sumerians had no word for clock out, but we had beer o'clock long before your people thought to name it. He sips thoughtfully. Course, it wasn't just the workers. Even scribes got into it. He tells you about how scribes, with their aching backs and ink-stained fingers, would finish up their day at the tablet house and head straight to these dens. Here they drink and swap clever riddles, gossip about temple politics, and occasionally sketch crude cartoons of their supervisors onto clay scraps. You glance toward the back of the room. Sure enough, a half-broken tablet rests on a shelf. You squint. It shows a man with an oversized nose, tripping over a stylus. Must have been hilarious in 2600 BCE. But perhaps the most striking feature of this Sumerian happy hour is the absence of formality. There are no toasts, no bar tabs, no long-winded speeches. It's beer, bread, and bodies trying to forget the heat of the day. The culture of casual unwinding was born not in gold-trimmed banquets, but in dimly lit reed huts with the floor still damp from flood season. And yet, it's here that relationships were built, marriages arranged, friendships forged, deals struck. This was the networking event of ancient Mesopotamia, but with fewer name tags and more flatulence. You look around the room. A woman in her 50s is gently singing a lullaby to the man dozing next to her. Two young boys, probably apprentices, are playing a quiet game with carved sheep bone pieces in the corner. A man scribbles something onto a scrap of clay with a stylus and slips it into his satchel. No loud declarations, no clinking of glasses. Just the quiet, sacred hour between labour and sleep, greased by warm beer and warm company. You exhale slowly, feeling the tension in your shoulders ease. Somehow, this all feels familiar, not just because it mirrors your own post-work rituals, but because it resonates at some deeper level. The idea that after effort, there must be pause. That community doesn't require structure, just an excuse. Your cup is empty. A server, a boy of about 13, refills it with a nod and returns to the back room without a word. You sip again, savouring the earthy, slightly sour brew. It's not delicious by modern standards, but it's comforting in its own way. You wonder how many thousands of years this pattern held, through floods, famines, invasions, and dynasties. Did Akkadian workers do the same? Babylonians? Assyrians? Did they also roll their eyes at their bosses over barley pints? The old man beside you pats your shoulder. Tomorrow will be hard. Always is. But tonight we drink. You raise your cup to him, and silently, to all those whose lives echoed this same rhythm across the ages. As you finish your drink and rise to leave, the den fades behind you into the night's hush. The canal still whispers, the stars still gleam, and your steps feel lighter now, like you've been allowed, even briefly, to belong to something ancient and enduring. The streets are quieter now. Even the stray dogs, once nipping at scraps by the bread stalls, have curled into doorways and shadows. A gentle wind drifts in from the river, carrying with it the scent of silt and damp reeds. It brushes against your face like a lullaby you almost remember. You pass a row of shuttered shops, cobblers, weavers, a scribe for hire whose signboard dangles lazily on one hinge. Beneath your feet, the packed earth and crushed brick pathway is soft in places, the dust of centuries clinging to your sandals. You wander without urgency, letting your feet choose their direction. Eventually, you arrive at a courtyard nestled between two mud brick homes, its doorway partially covered by hanging reeds. The aroma hits you first, spicy, pungent, and oddly floral. This is no tavern. This is where the temple brewers work. You step inside. It's cooler in here, and far more methodical than the places you've seen. Clay vessels are stacked neatly along the walls, and a few priestesses, barefoot, hair knotted in coils, move slowly around open vats, checking temperatures, adjusting lids, murmuring chants. This is beer, not just for pleasure, but for ritual. One of them sees you and smiles faintly, as if she's been expecting you for a long time. She gestures to a stool. You sit. She kneels beside a wide steaming vat, stirs it once with a long-handled paddle, and says, "You've drunk the workers' beer. Now you'll try Ninkasi's." The goddess of beer. Yes, she had her own hymn. Ninkasi did. One of the oldest recorded poems in human history. Not an ode to a king, not a tale of war, but a recipe for brewing. You remember the lines, fragmented, half-remembered, like, "Ninkasi, you are the one who bakes the bapia. You are the one who waters the malt. You are the one who pours out the filtered beer." A brewing manual sung as prayer, as if each frothy pint was divine. The priestess ladles a sample into a delicate cup and hands it to you. The brew is lighter than what the workers drank. Still cloudy, still sour, but there's something fragrant, almost floral to it. Maybe herbs, maybe honey. It slips down easily, warming your chest. You close your eyes, and in your mind's eye, you see a procession, not of warriors, but of women, chanting softly, carrying jugs, trailing garlands of reeds and flowers. They pass under archways carved with barley motifs, headed to the temple's inner sanctum. Their goddess waits, not with thunderbolts or lions, but with frothy libations and the gentle hush of fermented grains. It's a curious thing, isn't it, that in a world so full of violence, pride, and conquest, the divine could also be found in the quiet bubbling of yeast and the careful timing of temperature. Historians still debate whether the beer brewed for Ninkasi's rites was ever drunk by the public or remained sacred, poured out in offerings, soaked into the earth, or sipped by the priesthood alone. Some clay tablets suggest these temple brews were reserved for festivals. Others hint they doubled as medicine or aphrodisiacs. One particularly controversial find, a jar sealed and buried for centuries, was opened by modern archaeologists and allegedly smelled of licorice and wet wheat. Whether it would have been drinkable, however, is debatable. You take another sip. The priestess watches you. It's not just drink, she says. It's memory. We brew what our mothers brewed. We remember by taste. You nod. And it makes sense. In a world without mass literacy, taste was archive. Scent was scripture. What was passed down wasn't just technique, it was identity. A tiny mouse scurries past the far wall, pausing to sniff a grain sack before vanishing into the shadows. One of the younger priestesses shoos it off with a sleepy hiss. The elder continues, "Even the gods drank. Or so we say." She tells you of a festival once held here in Uruk, a massive celebration in which even the statues of the gods were brought out, decorated with garlands, and offered cups of beer. The people believed the deities grew tipsy and merry, just as humans did, that their laughter echoed through the night. And it wasn't just the Sumerians. Later cultures, Babylonians, Akkadians, even the Egyptians, also linked beer to the divine. But the Sumerians were perhaps the first to formalize the idea that fermentation was sacred, that brewing was a form of worship, a sacred science, a bubbly theology. You finish your cup, and the priestess gently removes it from your hand. "Enough for now," she says, and you don't argue. You rise slowly, the warm buzz of divine drink humming behind your eyes. Before you leave, she places a small token in your palm, a carved bead, simple, smooth, the color of baked clay. "To remember," she says. Outside, the night is even quieter. Even the river seems to be holding its breath. You walk for a while with no destination in mind. The houses blur, the stars swim, and in the back of your mind, the words of that hymn return, like a lullaby half heard in childhood. Ninkasi, you are the one, you are the one. And for a moment, you're not in the 21st century, not in a YouTube video, not lying in bed listening to a soft voice drone on about ancient Mesopotamia. You're simply here, in the dust and heat, in the shadow of the ziggurat, sharing drink with strangers, remembering things you've never known, and maybe, just maybe, feeling the tiniest bit divine yourself. You're not sure how long you've wandered since leaving the priestess's courtyard. Uruk is quieter now, truly hushed. The breeze has faded. Even the cicadas, usually relentless, seem to have nodded off. Somewhere in the distance, a river frog lets out a croaky complaint and is swiftly shushed by silence. You find yourself standing in front of a garden, not the grand symmetrical kind you might associate with Babylon's famous terraces. No, this is far more humble. A patchwork of raised beds and mud channels, bordered by palm fronds and dusty stones. The faint scent of crushed coriander, wet earth, and maybe wild onions drifts on the air. This is where beer begins. Not in clay jugs or temple vats, but here, in soil, in sun, in irrigation, ditches dug by hand and kept from collapsing by sheer stubborn hope. You crouch beside a trough and touch the water. It's warm and muddy, but it flows. The Sumerians, you remember, were among the first to master large-scale irrigation. Their beer existed only because they could command the rivers, or at least argue with them convincingly. Without barley, there is no bapir. And without bapir, those twice-baked barley loaves, soaked and mashed into beer, there is no happy hour. You pluck a barley stalk, it's dry and sharp, already brittle at the tips. Harvest season is close. Someone nearby, probably half asleep, grumbles at a goat wandering too close to the seedlings. This field doesn't look like much, but it's revolutionary. Not just because it feeds people, but because it's part of a larger system. You recall that ancient tablets detail crop rotations, barley quotas, even bartering values. Historians still puzzle over how much beer a farmer might receive as rations versus what they could sell. But it's clear, agriculture and beer were inseparable. And here's a curious twist. Some fringe scholars argue that beer, not bread, may have been the real driver behind the agricultural revolution, that our ancestors didn't settle down just to bake loaves, but to brew. Imagine that. Entire civilizations rising not because someone wanted a sandwich, but because someone craved a cold drink with a kick. It's strangely relatable. You rise and walk the edges of the garden. Someone has etched a little spiral into one of the stones. A child's doodle maybe, or a mark to show ownership. You'll never know. The irrigation channels stretch out toward the canal, weaving like lazy fingers through the landscape. In the distance, you spot another group of workers, bent figures with baskets and long poles, skimming silt, adjusting flow, ensuring the barley gods are pleased. It's sweaty, repetitive, backbreaking work, but it's not thankless. In the small mud brick home beside the field, a woman fans herself beside a tiny fire. She stirs a pot, not beer this time, but porridge. Her husband dribbles a bit of leftover mash into it, because waste is unthinkable. Their child, barefoot and dirt smeared, giggles and pretends a reed is a sword. This family drinks beer daily, not as celebration, but as survival. It's safer than water. It provides calories. It keeps hunger at bay when the bread runs low. You watch as the father pours himself a cup from a squat jug. He doesn't sit or toast. He just drinks, wipes his mouth, and goes back to patching the roof. Life here isn't glamorous, but it's rhythmic, tied to seasons, predictable in a comforting sort of way, and beer is woven through it like thread. Not long ago, archaeologists found a set of household tablets listing grain allowances for every member of a family, including the servant, the child, and even, in one entry, a goat. Was the goat really getting beer? Historians argue that one. Some say it was a euphemism, goat, as a term for a lazy brother-in-law perhaps. Others insist it refers to a household pet granted ceremonial sips. Either way, the takeaway is clear. Beer was everywhere, in temples, in fields, in jokes. You pause at the edge of the garden and look back at the house. The woman has begun humming. It's a low, almost tuneless sound, part lullaby, part work rhythm. It wraps around you like a warm blanket, and you realize something. In this one patch of ancient ground, everything connects. The barley, the family, the irrigation, the brew, the goddess, the goat. It's all one ecosystem, a delicate web, sustained by muddy canals and dusty rituals. You leave the garden quietly, As you walk back toward the heart of Uruk, the streets have changed, not physically, but in feeling. What once seemed strange now feels familiar. The chipped steps, the leaning walls, the flickering oil lamps. They're not ruins or museum exhibits. They're lived in. They're yours now too. You pass a bakery, its ashes long cold. A rat peers at you from the corner and then decides you're not interesting enough to warrant attention. You take that as a compliment. Someone has painted a rough barley stalk on a doorway with what looks like ochre paste. A blessing? A declaration? Who knows? But you smile at it all the same. And then, rounding the last corner before the temple walls come back into view, you catch sight of a small shrine tucked into an alcove. Not for Ninkasi, not for any major god, just a household spirit, faceless, arms wide, carved from a lump of basalt. At its feet, a cracked bowl, half full of beer gone flat, an offering, not to demand, but to thank. You linger there a moment, your feet heavy, your breath slow. The night has deepened, and the stars above seem to hang lower now, as if resting their elbows on the horizon. You wonder how many generations passed through these streets, how many drank the same brew, smelled the same fermenting mash, watched the same sun set behind those same walls. And you realize you're part of it now. No one may write your name on a tablet, but in this sleepy beer-sweet city of clay and shadow, you've walked as one of them. And they, in some quiet way, have walked with you. You drift onward through the streets, no longer quite sure whether you're walking or dreaming. The beer haze of ancient Uruk wraps itself around you like a well-worn blanket, warm, faintly damp, with a peculiar whiff of old bread and roasted chickpeas. Somewhere in the distance, laughter bubbles up again. But it's softer now, sleepier. Even the city seems to be yawning. You pass a public courtyard with uneven paving stones, and right in the middle of it sits something unexpected. A board game. Carved into the surface of a flat rock are a series of squares, zigzagging in neat little rows. Pebbles, knucklebones, and small etched discs sit beside it like forgotten tokens. You crouch down, running your fingers along the ancient grooves. The royal game of Historians still debate its exact rules, and even more argue about its meaning. Was it purely entertainment? A tool for teaching children about risk and strategy? Or perhaps a ritual game played to honor the gods and secure a lucky harvest? You can't say for certain, but you do know this. Sumerians loved their games, and more importantly, they loved to play them while drinking. This wasn't just recreation, it was social glue, a nightly ritual as vital as dinner or worship. Friends would gather, share a jug of fermented barley drink, and settle in for a round or two under the stars, their laughter drifting through the streets like incense. And just like in every generation since, someone always got too competitive. There's a clay tablet from around 2600 BCE that mentions a man named Ur-Gibel, who supposedly lost his neighbour's donkey in a bet over a board game. Whether it's satire or serious is still up for debate. But either way, imagine being immortalised in history as the guy who gambled away livestock because he couldn't roll a decent number. You sit by the game board and imagine the scene. Two players hunched close, flickering lamplight casting long shadows across their faces. One of them carefully moves a token. The other groans in disbelief, knocking back a gulp of beer before launching into an exaggerated monologue about fate, the gods, and the cruelty of chance. Nearby, children giggle. An old woman pretends not to watch, but her eyes gleam with every play. A street dog snoozes at someone's feet. And through it all, that same beer, the same mash of barley and thyme, passes from hand to hand in a communal jug. No individual cups, just a straw dipped in the same pot, each sip a thread tying the group closer together. You rise and continue past the courtyard, stepping into one of the larger plazas. This is where merchants gather during the day, their stalls shaded by reed mats and loaded with dusty goods. But now the stalls are quiet, shutters drawn, tables cleared of fish and onions. What's not cleared, though, are the empty beer jars. Some sit neatly stacked in baskets, others lie tipped over, their last drops long since soaked into the sand. One particularly artistic pot has been decorated with little birds, wearing what looks like tiny shoes. You have to blink a few times to be sure that's really what it shows. It is. Someone had a sense of humour. Maybe they even laughed while painting it. Beer jars were often marked by breweries with small images or seal stamps, so people knew where the brew came from. Uruk's own branding system, centuries before modern logos. You spot one jar stamped with a crescent moon and a bunch of barley stalks tied together. Another bears the mark of a star-eyed lion. Some were commercial logos. Others might have represented taverns or even brewmistresses, who, yes, often ran their own establishments. In fact, Sumerian women were frequently in charge of brewing and selling beer. They didn't just serve it. They owned the recipe, ran the tab, and controlled the vibe. The city's oldest laws even include fines for watering down beer or shortchanging customers. And one particularly stern law from the Code of Urukagina forbids brewers from overcharging for their drink during a drought. This wasn't just a pleasure drink, it was sustenance. Fair access was a moral concern. You pause beside a toppled amphora and brush the sand from its neck. Someone once drank from this, maybe to celebrate a birth or a harvest, or to forget a particularly terrible day involving runaway goats and mouldy papier. There's a quiet comfort in that thought. You move on, feet scuffing the soft earth, until you find yourself near the riverbank. The mighty Euphrates glistens in the moonlight like a spilled ribbon of silver. Reeds sway gently. A frog chirps. There's a dock here, low and crumbling, and next to it, a cluster of sleeping boats. Reed canoes tied loosely with fraying rope. The water laps at their sides, like a mother soothing a restless child. It was here that shipments of barley came in, and it was here that barrels of finished beer were sent out, often alongside baskets of fish, dried dates, and once, according to an ancient receipt, a truly baffling number of hedgehog skins. No one knows why. Historians are still arguing, but trade moved through this place. Beer was economy as much as it was recreation, and it was thanks to rivers like this one, managed by levees, canals, and the endless labour of people with aching backs and calloused hands. You sit at the water's edge and watch a dragonfly zip past your nose. For a moment, the city fades behind you. All you hear is the hush of water, the occasional snore of a boatman napping under sailcloth, and the soft burp of a jar fermenting somewhere nearby. In that quiet, you imagine the beer again, not just as a drink, but as a way of being. Social, ritual, practical. A gift from the gods that also made you burp. And even here, by the sleepy riverbank, in the cool breath of night, it lingers. The river hums behind you now, a sleepy echo of water and wind as you wind your way back into the heart of the city. The moon still hangs overhead, casting long shadows that stretch like yawns across the dusty streets of Uruk. Somewhere nearby, a clay door creaks as it's pulled shut for the night. Another tavern closing up shop perhaps, another barrel drained, another chorus of laughter fading into silence. You move slowly now, whether from the weight of the night or the barley haze that seems to settle into your bones. It's hard to tell. But the rhythm of the city has shifted. The party has ended, but the people remain. Because in ancient Sumer, beer didn't stop flowing when the sun went down. In fact, for many people, this was when things really got going. You find yourself near the edge of a temple complex, not the Grand Ziggurat, but a smaller shrine dedicated to Ninkasi herself. Yes, the very goddess of beer. Her name is carved into a cracked clay plaque above the doorway. It reads like a love letter from 1,000 years ago. Ninkasi, the one who lets the beer be filtered through the reed mat, who makes your heart feel light and your knees vaguely unreliable. Inside, offerings sit quietly in the dim glow of oil lamps. Small bowls of dates, dried fish, maybe a bit of that honey bread you've now smelled at least 6 times tonight and still haven't tasted. It's a modest altar, tucked away from the bustle, but you can tell it's cared for. The people of Uruk didn't just appreciate beer, they worshipped it. They saw it as a divine act, a liquid miracle. Brewing was sacred work, and those who did it well were spiritual artisans, not just cooks with an affinity for sticky floors. One of the oldest hymns ever written, possibly the oldest, depending on which scholar you ask, is the hymn to Ninkasi, a kind of sung recipe. It was recited during daily brewing, blending ritual, rhythm, and instruction. In it, the process of making beer is elevated to something mythic. You are the one who waters the malt set on the ground. You are the one who soaks the malt in a jar. You are the one who spreads the cooked mash on large reed mats. Poetic, sure, but also oddly relaxing, like ASMR for ancient brewers. Historians still debate whether this hymn was purely functional, like a mnemonic for apprentices, or more ceremonial, maybe both. But what's clear is that brewing wasn't left to chance. It required intention, precision, and a deep respect for the gods who made fermentation possible. You ease yourself down beside the shrine and imagine the scene a few hours ago. A priestess lighting incense, a few worshippers clinking mugs in a symbolic toast, a quiet chant filling the air, half prayer, half instruction manual. And outside the temple, commerce, because right across the square lies a bustling beer market, or at least it did earlier today. Sumer had no coins, no cash registers. Transactions were recorded on clay tablets with precise pictograms, tiny wedges and symbols etched with the same care you give to a sacred scroll. A scribe might document the sale of 4 jugs of dark beer in exchange for 2 baskets of onions and 1 reasonably polite goat. It wasn't just bartering, it was bureaucratic poetry. And speaking of poetry, beer shows up constantly in Sumerian literature, in jokes, songs, proverbs. One classic Sumerian saying goes, "A man without a wife is like a jug without beer." Another warns, "Don't tell secrets after 3 cups." Sage advice, really. You pass by one of the clay tablets displayed near the market square, its faint carvings barely visible in the moonlight. A translator once interpreted this one as a record of a legal dispute between neighbours. One claimed the other watered down his beer and failed to repay a brewing debt. The case apparently took 3 witnesses, 2 chickens, and what the record calls a dramatic display of shouting. And you thought modern customer service was bad. But disputes aside, beer was central to the city's economy. Labourers were often paid in it. Temple workers received rations calculated in measures of beer per day, sometimes differentiated by job title. More for the priests, less for the scribes, even less for the guy who had to clean the public latrine. Those were called kuduru workers, by the way. And yes, they had strong stomachs. You wandered deeper into the maze of clay and shadow, passing low-walled homes and quiet courtyards. At the base of one house, a storage room lies open. Inside, rows of ceramic pots, neatly stacked, their contents likely long gone but unmistakable. Beer jars, each one with a stopper made of mud and straw, some still bearing the faint fingerprint of whoever sealed it thousands of years ago. And beside them, a battered reed mat, flattened by centuries. Someone used to sleep here, maybe the brew mistress herself, keeping an eye on her stock. Maybe her daughter, learning the trade. Maybe a thief who drank too much and passed out before finishing the job. Whoever it was, they're gone now. But their beer lingers, etched into every pot, every tablet, every rule, every ritual. Even in your quiet steps, there's a rhythm to the night that feels familiar. The heartbeat of a city that lived and breathed through its barley. You lean against the cool wall and breathe in. Somewhere, the wind carries a final note from a flute. Somewhere else, a child mumbles in their sleep. And somewhere, perhaps only in your imagination, a voice is still singing the hymn to Ninkasi, like a lullaby. The drink of the gods, the joy of the people, the heartbeat of the oldest happy hour. You wake, or maybe you never quite slept, beneath the slow turning stars above Uruk, with the distant scent of roasting chickpeas in the air and a soft thudding from somewhere nearby. It's the rhythmic tamp of someone mashing grain. The city, even now, refuses to fall fully silent. There's always someone brewing, mixing, fixing, sweeping, mumbling, or just trying to remember where they left their sandals. As you stretch your arms and rub a patch of clay dust from your face, you notice movement near a set of low brick structures. These are no grand temples or markets. They're brew houses, modest, often female-run operations where the real magic of Mesopotamian nightlife happened. You step closer, One of the doorways flickers with the orange glow of a dying fire. Inside, a woman kneels beside a clay oven, gently poking a pot nestled in the embers. The scent is unmistakable. Roasted bapir. That's the barley bread used to make Sumerian beer. Not something you'd slather with butter and serve at brunch, but more like a rock-solid biscuit meant for boiling. Think of it as the primordial beer cube. Historians still argue over the exact recipes. Some believe the bapir was baked twice, like a biscotti, then broken up and soaked in warm water with malt and dates. Others suggest it was more of a slurry, a thick porridge left in the sun until fermentation took hold, then strained and spiced. Either way, it was a family affair, and a female affair too. Brewing in ancient Sumer was largely handled by women, not because they were just helping in the kitchen, but because the art of fermentation was linked to divine femininity, community leadership, and even priestly duty. In fact, many brewers belonged to a guild of women known as the Sabitu. These weren't just home brewers. They were professionals. They managed distribution, supervised staff, oversaw offerings, and, most impressively, dealt with drunk customers with the patience of demigods. One clay tablet from the city of Lagash details a list of fines imposed on rowdy tavern goers. Breaking a stool, 1 jug fine, shouting at the brewer, 2 jugs fine, singing poorly after sunset, community apology, and no beer for 3 days. Tough love. You move quietly into the open courtyard between several brew houses, where leftover bapir sits cooling on wide reed trays. A cat prowls along the edges, eyeing the scraps. Even in the dark, you can spot the telltale signs of yeast bloom across a few old pots. A white bubbly skin on the liquid surface. Nature doing what it does best. Fermentation was not fully understood by Sumerians. How could it be? They didn't have microscopes. No Louis Pasteur. No pH meters. But they knew something magical happened when time, warmth, and grain came together. A bubbling transformation. A cheerful miracle. They even had a symbol for it. The Sumerian cuneiform for beer is a triangle with lines radiating out, resembling a jar with froth. That symbol appears on thousands of tablets, tax records, offering lists, love poetry. It was everywhere. And then you notice something curious. Carved into the wall of one brewhouse, just above eye level, is a mural. Not grand, no gold leaf or fancy inlays, but a painted scene, flaking with age. It shows 3 figures, a woman pouring from a large jug, a seated man grinning wide, and a dog under the table lapping at spilled foam. It's an ancient happy hour, and it's utterly charming. You lean closer. The dog has a collar made of tiny painted beads. The man wears a wreath of leaves, probably symbolic of celebration, or more likely, a hangover prevention myth. And the woman? She wears an apron and holds a wooden ladle like a scepter. Queen of the barley realm. It's moments like this that bring the past vividly, wonderfully close, because while we often imagine the ancient world in sepia tones and silence, the truth is that it pulsed with joy, mischief, laughter, and love. Someone painted this scene not as propaganda or myth, but to capture a moment of daily life. It's as close to a snapshot as 3000 BCE could get. And as you tilt your head, the moonlight reveals something else, an inscription just below the mural, a toast written in Sumerian. It loosely translates to joy, to peace, to the beer that makes bad neighbors sing together. You chuckle softly. Whoever wrote that had clearly lived next to someone with a strong voice and a weak sense of pitch. But beer wasn't just social lubrication, it was medicine too. Or at least, it tried to be. Ancient Sumerian medical texts list beer as a treatment for all kinds of ailments: fevers, constipation, anxiety, even toothaches. One remedy advised boiling date beer with crushed licorice root and applying it to the forehead until the spirit calms. Whether that worked is debatable, but it sounds like a decent excuse to take a nap. Of course, not everyone approved of beer's omnipresence. There were social critics even then. A few surviving texts warn against overindulgence, especially among priests and politicians. One fragment reads, "He who toasts too often will forget which god he serves." But moderation wasn't the point. Connection was. You pass another mural, this one simpler, just a clay jug with painted steam curling from the top and a cluster of dots below, the symbol for warmth, hospitality, a welcome drink. And then it hits you. In a city of gods, gold, and grand design, it's the small things, the quiet brewhouse, the scribbled joke, the woman with her ladle, that make the place feel alive. The brewers of Uruk weren't just fueling parties, they were shaping community, creating safe spaces, giving tired people something to laugh over at the end of a long, sun-baked day. You find a step and sit. A warm breeze passes through the courtyard, rustling the reed trays and lifting a strand of your hair. Somewhere, a pot bubbles. Somewhere else, a child dreams of rivers, frogs, and flying bread. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you swear you hear the chant again. Soft, rhythmic, rising from the memory of a temple. You are the one who spreads the mash. You are the one who lets the beer ferment in the quiet. A few hours pass, or maybe just minutes. Time becomes soft here, like over-wet bread dough. You wake to find yourself, once again, strolling the winding alleyways of Uruk, drawn now by a low, pulsing rhythm echoing off the walls. It's not drums, exactly. More like the sound of people gathering. Soft chatter, laughter, the occasional clay cup clink. You follow it instinctively and find yourself outside what might be the world's oldest dive bar. Not the neon-lit variety, of course. This one is tucked into a humble brick courtyard, shaded by a thatch awning and surrounded by benches worn smooth by 1,000 behinds. There's no sign, but the smell of malt and the steady stream of locals ducking through the entrance is a dead giveaway. This, dear listener, is the Sumerian Tavern, and tonight you've arrived just in time for the social hour. You step inside. The air is thick with steam and the tang of fermenting grains. Low clay oil lamps cast long shadows along the walls, and underfoot, the packed dirt floor is slightly damp, either from spilled drink or someone's careless sandal. In the center of the room is a massive communal vat, the heart of the operation. From it, long reed straws poke upward like an accidental bouquet. Here's how it worked. Sumerians didn't pour beer into mugs. Instead, they brewed and served it all in one vessel. A thick, porridge-like drink that you had to sip through a straw to avoid getting a mouthful of sediment. These straws were often made from reeds or even metal, sometimes with tiny filters at the end to strain out the chunky bits. Because nothing says refinement like sipping your beer through a glorified soup colander. You find a seat at one of the low benches, wedged between a merchant still in his market robes and a teenage temple scribe who smells suspiciously like burnt incense. The conversation drifts from irrigation failures to how much barley the king's officials skimmed off this season's grain tax. Spoiler, it was too much. And there's a woman across the vat, older, maybe in her late 40s, with sun-creased skin and gold thread woven into her headdress, who's telling a raucous story about how she once delivered a full amphora of beer to the city watch and drank half of it on the way. Everyone laughs. Even the dog, curled beneath the table, lets out a sleepy woof. Historians still debate the exact social rules of these taverns. Some believe they were primarily female-run spaces, a continuation of brewing's domestic origins. Others suggest they were more egalitarian, a rare venue where rich and poor mingled with relative freedom. What's more certain is that taverns were social pressure valves. When the temple hierarchy got too stiff, or the workday too hot, this is where people came to blow off steam. They told jokes, sang songs, swapped gossip, and yes, made poor romantic decisions that would later require complex apologies and maybe the gifting of a goat. There's even evidence of drinking games. One cuneiform tablet, crudely etched but unmistakable, shows a row of men sitting with upturned hands, each in front of a large jug. The caption reads something like, "The one who spills first buys the next round." A concept as eternal as it is soggy. You reach for one of the communal straws and take a cautious sip. The beer is room temperature, cloudy, with hints of date and a sour tang that hits the back of your throat like an underwhelming kombucha. It's not exactly delicious, but after a few sips, something shifts. The bitterness fades, the warmth spreads, and before long, you're leaning forward, asking the merchant to repeat the joke about the priest who mistook an idol for a laundry rack. Now, not everyone was thrilled about this kind of merrymaking. In fact, the law code of Uruk-agina, one of the earliest known sets of legal reforms, includes provisions aimed squarely at tavern owners. She who opens the tavern door to rebels, it warns, will be stoned outside her house with barley stones. That's not poetic metaphor. Those were actual stones, used to grind barley. Talk about heavy punishment. But despite the scowling lawmakers, taverns persisted. People needed them, not just as places to drink, but as venues for storytelling, music, and community decisions. Some scholars even believe minor legal disputes were settled over beer. Agreements made with a handshake and a shared straw. Think of it as arbitration with snacks. You notice that the walls of this tavern are etched with little graffiti, not grand art, just scratches made by idle hands. One says, "Urudu was here. He sang badly, but paid well." Another reads, "The brewer's daughter dances like a falling reed." And one, curiously, is just a little frowny face with tear marks. Some ancient soul's equivalent of the post-breakup Instagram story. You lean back and take in the room again. It's warm, noisy, alive. It reminds you, oddly enough, of a college pub, or maybe that chaotic living room party where someone's uncle started reciting poetry and no one had the heart to stop him. This was the cradle of civilization, and yet the people feel so human, so close. Yes, they worship strange gods and chew on reeds and think crocodile oil cures wrinkles, but they also tell bad jokes, worry about taxes, and invent new excuses for being late to temple. Outside, the night deepens. The stars above Uruk wheel slowly in their ancient rhythms. Someone begins humming a lullaby near the tavern hearth, and others join in. A gentle, meandering tune about barley fields and the way the wind sounds before the rain. You close your eyes and listen, not just to the melody, but to the layered hush beneath it, the shuffle of sandals, the distant splash of a water jug, the sigh of an old woman resting her back against the wall. For all their temples and epics and administrative bureaucracy, the Sumerians were, at heart, a people who knew how to end a day, with bread, with beer, and with each other. You feel your breathing slow, your limbs grow heavier, and in the last few moments before sleep tugs you under, you hear one final toast from across the vat, spoken in a language so old it might as well be wind. To those who came before, to the gods who drink with us, and to the barley, without which none of this would be bearable. By now, the city has gone quiet. The tavern has emptied out, save for a few regulars, those content to nurse their final sips beneath flickering lamps as the night slips ever deeper. You step back into the cool air of Uruk's twilight, your sandals crunching softly on the gravel. Somewhere behind you, a reed flute stumbles through the opening notes of a folk song, slightly out of tune, but played with heart. You follow a narrow lane that twists and curls between shadowy brick homes, until it opens up once again to the great canal. The moon glimmers on the water like a polished silver coin, and it's here that you spot a small barge drifting lazily past. It's loaded with amphorae, all sealed with clay and straw, sloshing faintly with the last batch of the season's brew. Two boys pole the boat along, half asleep, humming to each other in that toneless, hypnotic way that only people too tired to speak can manage. You wave, they wave back. You rest on a low stone ledge, watching them vanish around a bend, and once again, you find yourself amazed, not by war or conquest or glittering ziggurats, but by how much of human life survives the centuries intact. The urge to gather at the end of the day, the need to relax, to talk nonsense, to celebrate small joys in the face of big questions. You reach into your satchel, because of course, now you have a satchel, everyone does here, and pull out a small clay tablet. It's the kind merchants use, pressed with neat little wedge shapes. This one's blank, save for a stylus mark in the top corner. Just one line. And though you can't read cuneiform, you somehow know what it says. Don't forget to live a little. You smile, tucking it back inside. Let's linger a moment more. Sumerian brewers, as it turns out, were largely women, brew mistresses working from their homes, temples, or community workshops. One famous hymn, dedicated to the goddess Ninkasi, serves as both a prayer and a recipe. You are the one who bakes the bapia, it declares, referring to a hard barley cake used in brewing. And with sweet dates, you fill the fermentation vat. The hymn's real power isn't just in its reverence, it's in its rhythm. The entire piece is designed to be sung as you work, each line matching emotion: stir, need, pour, sing. Scholars argue whether it functioned primarily as liturgy or instructions. Most likely, it was both. A melodic recipe passed through generations of women who, as it turns out, may have been history's first brewmasters. And that is part of what makes this place so surprisingly human. Despite the bureaucrats with their styluses and clay rations, despite the priests tracking lunar calendars with terrifying precision, this civilization, one of the first, was built just as much on laughter, fermentation, and the art of having a good time. Historians still debate whether taverns were officially sanctioned or semi-legal. Some point to temple-run beer halls, others to signs that suggest more informal setups. One line in a Sumerian ledger simply reads, "Two men went into the beer house. One came out with no sandals. Interpret that how you will." Back along the canal, the night thickens, but there's one last place to visit. You head toward a small garden near the edge of the city walls. Not much grows here now. It's late in the season, but the soil smells rich, and the air carries the faintest scent of sesame and wild onions. In the distance, a donkey sighs in its sleep, and not far off, a woman is softly singing to her infant, the words too gentle to carry far. This was the edge of ancient nightlife, the space beyond rituals and records, the liminal hour when the city sleeps, and people remember who they are beneath the roles they play. A priest becomes just a tired man rubbing his back. A merchant turns into someone who wants to hear a story. And you, wandering visitor from another time, get to fade into that hush, to breathe in the warm, barley-sweet air of a world long gone and yet so alive. And now, here at the edge of ancient Uruk, where the reeds bow gently to the wind and the stars press their quiet silver against the deep blue sky, it's time to let the rest of this story dissolve. You've wandered through dusty markets and candle-lit taverns. You've sampled thick beer through reed straws and listened to gossip whispered in the shade of temples. You've seen how the oldest cities weren't just cradles of civilization. They were cradles of laughter, of friendship, of shared music and late-night joy. The air here is soft now, like fabric draped over a dream. The streets are still, the canals mirror the moon, and the scent of roasted grain lingers in the shadows. You've walked far tonight, farther than most, and your footsteps now leave only echoes. Breathe in slowly. Feel the day drift away. There is nothing left to do. No ledgers to mark. No jars to seal. No jokes to remember. Just this. The soft hush of ancient nights. The warmth of shared humanity. And the quiet comfort of knowing that even thousands of years ago, people found ways to unwind, to rest, and to smile at nothing in particular. So close your eyes if they haven't closed already. Let yourself settle. Let your breath find its rhythm. And let the ancient world keep watch as you slip into sleep.